Okay, good evening folks. I'm Paul, M0XPD, and it's great to be here. I've been travelling around. I've been travelling in North America, and Iceland gave me, myself and my wife, an interesting option of a new way to get from the United Kingdom, where I live, to North America. And on the way back we had this interesting opportunity to visit Iceland, and we took that opportunity, so here we are. And then I got in contact with John, and John said, well, you could not just come and visit, you could come and talk. But I've been talking for too long in North America. I've done 3 talks in the last couple of weeks, and I'm getting fed up of talking. The first talk was to the Portland County Amateur Radio Service. My professional activities are in the areas where electronics and audio intersect. And I work in a small company which I co-founded, which makes a piece of silicon which is the basis for products like Bose noise cancelling headsets. We make the engines which competitors for Bose use in their products. And so I'm involved in electronics and audio's intersection professionally. And so I talked about the way audio is involved in the receiving chain, particularly of amateur radio, when I was over at Portland County a couple of weeks ago. And then I was, as you know, involved in the Dayton Convention, or more properly the QRP convention, which happens at the same time as the Dayton Hamvention, in a place called Fairborn, which is just next door to Dayton. And I gave a paper there called Occam's Script, which was a play on ideas associated with William of Ockham, who's a famous old English philosopher and logician, who came up with something called Occam's razor, which you may have heard about. It's a principle that says, don't make things any more complicated than they already are. Keep it simple. And Occam's Script was talking about how do you go about measuring RF problems in a very simple way. If you don't want to assemble a complicated RF lab, can you do things that are still useful in a very simple way, which appeals to the spirit that we often use in QRP, which is about not just minimizing the number of watts that we use, but minimizing component count, minimizing the bill of materials in the device, minimizing complexity. And I was extending that idea to the way in which we instrument things in the laboratory and on the workbench when we're home brewing. So that was the basis of that conversation. And then I did a different sort of talk in a library in Ohio, associated with the fact that I just brought out a book. At least a couple of months ago I brought out a book. And this book is about last year's journey to Dayton, and the journey onward from Dayton to where Deborah and I used to live back in the late 1980s, where we lived in Wyoming in the United States. And that's when I was teaching EE, and we had our twin daughters, which everybody's been laughing about, the Darlington pair, that came into the world at that sort of time. And this book tells the story of the journey which went last year to Dayton and then across the United States by road back to our old home in Laramie, Wyoming. So those 3 talks I've done recently, and I'm sick of hearing them, so I don't want to do them again this evening, so I thought I'd talk about something completely different. And the completely different subject is actually motivated by a connection I had with, or a contact I had with Iceland a few weeks ago, and it's about beacons. I wanted to talk about beacons because, as I say, I had this little contact with an Icelandic ham, which I'll show you later on. And I'm also quite interested in beacons because there's something different, and I make some equipment which is associated with beacons, and I just thought it'd be fun and different, pleasant for me, and an interesting opportunity to talk. In the UK, historically, we have this chain of beacons that are visual beacons that are lit on certain occasions, not least to remind us or warn everybody when Vikings are coming to invade, because you guys used to come and or at least the people that are celebrated on these islands, used to come and interfere with our northeast coast and cause all sorts of damage up on the northeast, and we got terribly worried about it, so we used to have to signal the arrival of Vikings, and that's one of the things that beacon chains were used for, to signal the arrival of Vikings. And I've heard an awful lot of stories of how this nation has some Viking roots, which of course we all celebrate, so that's just a joke. So this is going to be about beacons. When you think about beacons in ordinary practice, one of the sort of standard images that most people have, I think, about beacon operation is actually something like that, where you very much based in and around a PC, and the PC is running some code of some sort depending on the particular beacon mode that you're using, and that is then producing oftentimes audio frequency signals from the sound card, and maybe some control signals as well, which are effectively keying a rig or asserting control over a cat interface or something, to an ordinary ham rig shown slightly to the right, and then an antenna. So that's, if you like, a standard interpretation of the way most people get involved in beacons, and that's not what I'm interested in talking about today. So I'm not thinking about that sort of structure. I'm thinking about trying to replace that sort of structure with something that is made, something which is homebrewed, something which is different, because that's what I enjoy doing. And I'm going to show you some examples which are based on history, which is my history. My history doesn't go back very far because I've not been a ham for very long. I was only licensed originally in 2008. So even though I am old, and as you can see, grey, I'm not actually very old in terms of being a ham. I'm a new ham. So you're telling me you're a new ham too. We're brothers, okay? We're new hams. Here's something I did. One of my first activities in playing with beacons was using a software-defined radio, a soft rock, which is a little kind of kit which allows you to play with software-defined radio quite inexpensively without spending very much money. Because the next thing you need to know about me, apart from being old and being a new ham, is that I don't have very much money. Okay? There's not very much in here. And what little there is in here, I don't like giving away. I keep it to myself. I'm a cheapskate. In English, I'm a cheapskate. And they understand that word in America as well. Cheapskate. It means you don't like to give your money away. And quite a lot of the people in QRP celebrate that idea of being a cheapskate. We don't like to spend lots and lots of money. There's something sort of slightly upsetting about the idea of passing money over when it's got to do with a leisure activity. And that's very much I'd rather pass it over for beer, or for fishing bait, or for some, or Deborah would rather spend it. I'm just joking. You know, we have to spend it on other things, not on our hobbies. So for me, hobbies are not the place where you splash lots of money around. They're the place where you deploy intelligence in order to do something smart. And giving away your money, for me, isn't smart. So I was playing with this soft rock, which I'd made in that not very good picture there, but the soft rock is a little printed circuit board here, which sits inside. It has a lid on it normally. It's sat inside a little aluminium enclosure. This is actually, although it's in terrible focus there, and I apologise, this is actually a little board which contains an SI570, which is a DDS chip, effectively. So a USB interface to a DDS chip, which is running as a very precise oscillator, which was clocking the DDS chips. The VFO as well. So with that system, I was actually running something called the Whisper mode, which is a beacon system which runs between two computers, and the receiving computer recognizes this digital beacon mode, decodes it, and when it when it effectively receives a valid transmission, it registers all the information up to the cloud effectively, and you can go and look up the successful reception, and it produces a map which you can see down on the left hand side. That's not just any old map, that's the particular map associated with the first experiments with that particular rig back in 2010. And it's not very impressive, but the point is it's the real one that I got with that first experiment. So here I am in my home in Manchester, squirting out signals to all over Europe with something that cost pennies, that was putting out a little over a watt, and I was quite pleased at the time because it was working well, and because I was only in the game for a year and a little bit, and because it seemed like progress. But it was depending still on the PC at the top left of the picture, and that felt like leaning very heavily on technology which I didn't own, and it didn't feel very smart. It didn't feel as if I really controlled the game. And what I'd rather be doing is being very much the owner of these things, very much owning the technology, rather than relying on what other people do. And so I got interested in the idea of building beacons which were really an expression of me, rather than an expression of what somebody else is trying to do inside a PC with some software. Because all this is really doing is being a rather dumb transmitter. And all the smarts, all the intelligence going on inside here. And what I'm much more interested in, as I say, is expressing something of this intelligence rather than somebody else's intelligence. So I got started with playing at building beacons which were self-contained, based around microcontrollers, microprocessors and so on. And at that time, back in 2010, that involved you being able to play with devices like microcontrollers, microprocessors and so on. So they weren't necessarily very publicly accessible devices. You had to be slightly strange. You had to be a bit of an electronics geek to use them. They weren't the sort of thing that even ordinary radio amateurs necessarily were equipped to use back in 2010. Now that story is going to change later on, because now there are microcontrollers and single board computers that everybody in this room is equipped to use. That might surprise you, but it's true. Okay, there's not one person in this room that couldn't, if they wanted to, go out and use some of the small computers that I'll show you in a moment. I don't know whether you do or not, but you're perfectly empowered to do it. But back at that time, things were different. You had a few choices, and the most important one was afforded by a company called Microchip. And that's kind of poignant, because the first microprocessor I ever played with was that one. I don't mean it was like that one, I mean it was that one. It was General Instrument CP1600, and I was trying a few months ago to find a photograph of one to put on the internet, so I could say, oh, one like this, a General Instrument CP1600. So I went search image, you know, the way you do, and there isn't an image of a General Instrument CP1600 on the internet. There's images of everything else, 6800, 6502s, Z80s and all the rest. But not one of those. So I had to go and dig out all the junk boxes and try and find this original device that I used whenever it was, back in the 1980s sometime. And I still miraculously had it. And now that's my picture, and that's the first one that ever made you can find on the internet of that processor. It's an interesting processor because it's 16-bit. It copies the architecture of the PDP-8, which is a very famous Digital Equipment Corporation mini computer, and it's a very interesting device, quite a long way ahead of its time. And the slightly poetic part of all of this is that the people that made it, General Instruments, became Microchip. So Microchip emerged from this company. And here I was, 30-some years later, playing with devices called PICs, P-I-C, Peripheral Interface Controllers, made by a company called Microchip, which emerged from the very first microprocessors I ever played with. And that's a picture of, effectively, the system that I put together based on these Microchip devices. There were two of them eventually, but here's there is the most important one of them. And what else is there in the story? This SI570 again, which is effectively a DDS board, a small QRP power amplifier, and an output filter of that PA. You can see these are all home-brewed printed circuit boards which I've made, with the exception of that, which is a commercial item, and this is an ugly construction for an output harmonic filter. But that was the first of these, what turned out to be a family of beacons that I made. And if you look at this component here, I'm sorry, I'm running about to point, so look at this board here in more detail, you can see a little bit more of it. It involves, on the lower board, a it's actually a crystal oscillator, but I'm working as a voltage controlled crystal oscillator in order to produce what is actually a sort of a FM mode really that Whisper is based on, and one or two other beacon modes that I'll show you that this device can produce in just a moment. That's what the large bottom board does, but the top board, which plugs into the lower board, contains the PIC, which has all of the program inside it, and also some communication happens through here to talk to a computer to program this. And so that's the kind of smart part of the system. I don't know what the next picture is. Oh yeah, and I said there was an SI570, which was the fancy oscillator, DDS oscillator that was connected via USB. Well, I replaced all that with something of my own design, which is this board here. And then there is another bigger board that sits on, which both controls this DDS module and also interfaces to an LCD in order that you can control the whole thing and see what it's doing visually. And that's the bigger story of the bigger experiment. And the whole thing in a box looks slightly more pretty and looks a little bit more like a standalone system, because you can program it to do things with these up, down, left, right buttons here, and two mode buttons here, a big reset button on this side, and there's a display here that tells you everything that you're doing. Now this device now is multi-mode, that's to say it operates in different beacon modes, which I'll talk to you about in a moment. It's also multi-band, it switches between any of 3 bands, it's got the filters and so on inside to be able to change between those bands. At the operation of the menu system controlled here, and inside the box it's usually hidden away, but you might just be able to see that this is a transparent top for the box because that was its special see-through close for when it was going to exhibitions, and everybody could look in and go, ooh, I can see inside. They had a special exhibition case. And nobody was in the least bit interested in it, they just walked by. That system, as well as being able to do 40, 30, and any other mode, any other band that I plugged in, I had plug-in filters for the other one, I was only really interested in 40 and 30. It could also do QRSS, which is very, very slow Morse. It could also do DFCW, which is Morse code in which the dits and dars are expressed by a very small change in frequency, as well as expressed by ordinary, instead of expressed by ordinary keying. Let's say instead of turning on and off, you shift slightly upward in frequency to signify the change in state between on and off. It could also do Whisper, which I've already spoken to you about, and it could also do a modified version of Hellschreiber, which is writing words on what is effectively a spectrograph. And I'll show you pictures of that later because it's easier to see than it is to describe. And so I'll show you with some of the other beacons some examples of that modified version of Hellschreiber. But that's what that system could do. I'll show you some other systems to move on from that point in the story. I said a few moments ago that that PIC processor required you to be a bit of a geek, a bit of a sort of programmer or electronics type. We now start to move to systems which are invented really for school children. And because they're invented for school children, that means anybody with a technical qualification like a radio license can use them easily. And the first one of those is an English system, a device called the Raspberry Pi. A lot of these have dumb names, and you just have to forgive the names because you get past the name, don't worry about the name. There's a tradition for naming certain English computer systems, and some American ones like Apple, after fruits. I don't know why. And raspberry is just another one of them. So Raspberry Pi. This is the picture of the beacon system that I made in 2013 based on the Raspberry Pi, and the Raspberry Pi is just peeking into the picture down here because the rest of it was rather more important. There was a DDS module to generate frequencies, some level conversion, a small power amplifier, the output filter, and I can't remember what, oh that's just power supply, so there's nothing important there. But now let me show you the sort of thing that it can do. Here's the DFCW. Those two upward steps are the two DARs in the M of my call. M0 X da 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 X P ba 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 D da da da. So da 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 da. Yeah? Get it? There's my call. M0XPD in DFCW. And this is recorded from a grabber screen of somebody else's grabber, which is effectively, as I said, what we normally call a spectrogram of frequency here against time here, and showing in amplitude terms by the colour of the display. So where it gets light blue here, there's a lot of RF energy, and when it's black, there's none. Yeah. So you see my call starting here, da 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 da. Only that is several seconds long, possibly even several minutes long. Very, very slow. And this is what I meant by writing. It doesn't show very well, you can't see it very well, but there's what I just showed you before, the DFCW. And here, I'm not sure if it's the lights or something, you might just be able to make it. I've put in red ordinary, I've added this to the picture, this where it says what's going on. But it says here, M0XPD Raspberry Pi. It's much better to read on this, it's not shown very well there, honestly. But if you see it smaller and on the screen at the time, you can read it quite clearly. You can kind of read it there now, but it's not very impressive, I'll grant you. It looks better at the time, and when you've only just done it and you're full of pride, it looks particularly impressive. I'll show you some more examples that maybe are clearer to read. So this Raspberry Pi beacon was doing ordinary CW, let's say it would send out the call. That slow DFCW, the Hellschreiber, and it was sending out whisper as well. And there's some real whisper reports from it. Now it does all of these in a 10-minute cycle and just sits there, doing them automatically. I can also have it, if it wants to, hopping around in frequency slightly every 10 minutes, so that if somebody else is operating a beacon and that beacon's on this frequency, if I just by bad luck put my beacon on the same frequency, it'll never get received. But if I hop around a bit, then there'll be one point when I'm not coinciding with this other guy, and I'll find a clear channel. So it can do this frequency, random frequency hopping within a band if I ask it to. My life used to be kind of easy because nobody knew about it. You know, the Darlington pair hadn't been born, so nobody knew about me. But then things got kind of difficult because Bill Meara on Solar Smoke in the US, first of all, spotted this beacon that I'd made and thought that was kind of neat, so he put it on his podcast, and that was bad enough. But then it got onto Hackaday, which is an American hacking site, and that was even worse still. This was in January 2013, I think, if I remember properly. And then if you look at the traffic on my blog, in January 2013, things started to get noisy. Yeah? So I've been bumbling along here as a nice private individual, and then all of a sudden, boom! And that's when life started to get noisy for me. And ever since then, I've had a lot more interest in, people have been a lot more interested in what I was doing because of that dumb experiment in the Raspberry Pi. And I've been going to conferences and talking about radios and crap like that. The next of these systems that becomes important is similarly built around a heart or a brain, if you like, which everybody here can use. It's intended for public access. It's something named after that guy who was a king of Italy. Italy didn't really exist as a country, so he was king of part of Italy at least, back in the 1400s I think it was. His name was Arduino, and there was named after him a small single board computer. And it has a logo, because all of these things have to have logos. Now, I've already told you I'm cheap, right? I don't like spending my money. And Arduinos are not very expensive, but they're too expensive for me. So I made my own. And I gave it a name and a logo. I call it the What Do I Know? Not the Arduino, What Do I Know? And you can see the Arduino has got nice precise elements in its logo. Addition is a deterministic actions, mathematical operators. And my What Do I Know, which is all about doubt and low self-esteem, has got some symbols which are similarly about questioning and approximation. Yeah. And if you want to make this as a group project, all you do is change the pronunciation to What Do We Know? And then you collectively say, What do we know? So it's useful in both those cases. All of these systems, the Raspberry Pi and the Arduino and others like the BeagleBone and all of these things, arise from this book really. This was a book published quite a long while before. I think this was published around, it might be sort of 2005, that sort of time, quite a while before the Arduino, but including a guy called Tom Igoe, who was on the board of people that produced the Arduino. This book called Physical Computing is not a great book, but it's an interesting book in the way it predicts some of the way the world went, some of the trajectory of the world. And that started off this physical computing movement. An interesting book. There's the What Do I Know, the first What Do I Know board. And it's characterized by having exactly the same form factor, that's its size, and its input connectors are exactly the same as the Arduino, the commercial Arduino. And it's got its main processor, which is the same as the Arduino, at an angle like that, because I couldn't fit it on any other way, so it went across like that. And in every other respect, it's compatible with the Arduino. You program it using the same code and so on. And next, I made a shield. Shield is the Arduino word for another card that plugs on top of an Arduino to make extra functions. I made a shield to run a DDS module. Here's the DDS module. You used to buy these on eBay, and they cost, quick calculation, 1,000 Icelandic krona back in the day. They've become more expensive now, but you used to be able to buy them for 1,000 Icelandic krona on eBay. As I say, they're slightly more expensive now. And this shield allowed you to plug them directly into an into an Arduino straight away and get the system to run as a very useful and powerful VFO very quickly, for example. And the two of them look like that when they're stuck together. Here's the Arduino at the bottom, or the What Do I Know? And here, plugged into it on top, is the shield carrying the DDS module. And with that combination, you can generate a beacon system, for example, that gives you all of the flexibility that I showed you with the Raspberry Pi, for example. There at the top is this writing M0XPD colon slash, or hyphen there rather, Arduino. Here's the system that's doing it, what I just showed you before, the combination of the shield and the Arduino. A little power amplifier, sorry, that's the audio, this is receiving as well. A driver, a power amplifier, a low pass filter, and a receiving chain here as well, which I'll talk to you about in a moment. And here, again, the call M0XPD and M0, you can see it better there, I think, M0XPD Arduino. Okay, can you read it this time? This guy says it. Everybody else seems a bit less sure. But my friend here can read it. You can read it, yeah?
Yeah.
Perfect. I'll give you the money later on. Okay? Yeah. And it can do whisper. And now it starts to get a little bit better because it comfortably gets over into the United States and so on. And that, of course, is just to do with the power amplifier that was used. It's something to do with the difference in the processor. I showed you that that system had a receiving chain as well. It wasn't just a beacon. And that's because I also made a receiver shield for the Arduino, which is a DC receiver, a fairly standard sort of system with a modulator, some gain, and down here an audio frequency power amplifier to let you plug it straight into some headphones. The rest of them are just odd component blocks or system blocks. But the point was that the combination of those elements allowed me to make what has become a rather famous rig in the world of QRP, which is the rig you see on the left-hand side there, which is called Occam's microcontroller. Occam being the guy that I told you about earlier, microcontroller alluding to the fact that the whole rig is built on the skeleton of a microcontroller. And it was an attempt to demonstrate to people in the QRP world that you can make a CW transceiver built on the backbone of a very simple microcontroller. And so you had the key and the headphone and a tuning dial and a display of frequency, and this actually is a bandwidth control which was picking up something else I'd done separately. And the whole thing again was in a see-through box because it's for exhibition. And this particular picture was taken from the front cover of Sprat, which is the English QRP journal. And again, I said earlier, we have logos for things associated with Arduino, and I made some silly logos. This is a messing around with the GQRP Club's badge, if you like. And this guy here is Occam, William of Occam, taken from a stained glass window in the church in Occam, the place where he was born, which is in the southeast of England. And so that was a joke. But now commercially available are the DDS shield and the, let me get this right, where's the receiver shield? Here, the receiver shield, which I've showed you already, and a transmitter shield, which is also part of that system, so because you need a transmitter to be able to broadcast anything, obviously, but also a fancier a controlled oscillator, if you like, which is based on the SI5351, which gives you 3 programmable RF oscillator outputs, 2 of which are amplified, 1 of which goes to a QI divider, if you like, to provide you quadrature outputs. All of these systems, as I say, I've designed, and they're available from a company called Kanga. Can you read it anywhere? You see it says Kanga products here in the UK. And so those are all commercial items that have arisen from these games that I've been playing with beacons in the QRP world. And in my email box over the last couple of days, ironically, given that the processor on the Arduino, so it's not shown here, but the processor on the Arduino is made by Atmel, I was amused to find the microchip, people that make the PIC, have swallowed up Atmel. And so all of this world is becoming smaller and smaller as the different suppliers are being consumed into one. So the number of different providers are being consumed and shrunk into one source. Over the last few weeks, it's hardly months, but certainly over the last few weeks and maybe 2 months, I've been playing with a new idea for beacons, which I'm going to pick up over the next quarter, maybe quarter or 6 months, and we're planning to bring out another kit in this sort of area, and you're the first people I've told about this. And this is based on taking the beacon towards what's very much an on-trend idea, which is the Internet of Things, which you will have heard about. Because I think there's some possibilities of merging these two concepts a little bit closer together. And that's associated with some experiments that I've been doing on not playing with the Arduino directly, but playing with devices like that, which is the ESP8266, which is a device which started life as the component which was used on the Wi-Fi shield for Arduinos and so on. And that's to say, just the component that you plugged onto an Arduino to allow it to talk to a Wi-Fi system, to give it internet connectivity. But everybody realized that that device itself is programmable and also has input-output capability. And so you could take that device alone and use it as the main processor in a system. And in fact, they've realized that its programmability is kind of equal to the processor at the heart of the Arduino anyway, and so why don't we think of it as the kind of main brain in the system? And I've been playing around with this item as the brains for a beacon for the last few weeks and months. There's the prototype of this object, which has the little processor I showed you there, a DDS module here to generate some RF. This is just interface to talk to a computer to program it. You don't need that once it's running. And here is the transmitter shield that I just showed you earlier. So this could be any small RF transmitter. This one runs about 1.5 watts if you push it hard. And out of the picture is an output filter. With that system, again, you can do the usual sorts of signals like my call just shown here. Well, you've seen that 100 times now, but that's the real one. And with that, I'm getting all around the world very, very easy. On all the it does all the modes, but that's Whisper, as I've shown you before. And it easily gets everywhere. Or at least it gets everywhere I need it to go. And we'll talk about where it gets to and why just in a moment. Now, there are two reasons at the moment I'm interested in using this type of device. The first reason is that the system needs to be synchronized to absolute time really quite well. And I've tried using in the past real-time clocks, and they kind of work, but they're kind of expensive and kind of clumsy. But that doesn't mean they're not useful. I've also tried to use GPS, and they're fine, but it just so happens that one, my shack is in Manchester, which is kind of about as wet as Iceland, it seems, and a lot of cloud cover. But more importantly, my shack faces north, and so the window faces north. And if you combine those two things, a north-facing window and a lot of cloud cover, it's difficult to get good connectivity from a GPS module. It's fine if you take it to the other side of the house, or put it outdoors, but an ordinary GPS module on the kind of windowsill of the north-facing window on a cloudy day, I wasn't getting very good reception. So I tried those two things. They didn't work so easily as this device, which just goes, snap, here's the absolute time from a time server on the internet straight away. So that's one nice thing about using this type of device. The second nice thing about it is that I can be anywhere in the world controlling a beacon, because I can control it remotely from a phone by just sending it a command, turn on or turn off, or do anything else that I want to program it to do. And all of these devices are collectively called Manned Experimental Prototype Transmitters, MEPT. And did you hear what that first word was? Manned. They're supposed to be manned. And if I'm not there, they're not hardly manned, are they? Well, you can kind of be there virtually if they're connected to the internet. So there's some interesting ideas about remote operation that become immediately possible if you've got this device connected to the internet. And to demonstrate that, here's me standing next to this lighthouse here on the northeast coast of England, operating the beacon through my telephone, which was located here, close to the northwest coast of England, and demonstrating that I can do it remotely. This is only a distance of 200 kilometers, but of course it could be any distance you like, given that you can do it over 200 kilometers. Which brings me to why I wanted to do this talk on this subject in this place. Because with that beacon that I've showed you, I noticed that somebody up here in Iceland spotted my signals. And hey, that's neat. It's a guy called, I don't know how to pronounce his name because I can't speak Icelandic. Is he here tonight?
No, he is not. I called him and he
That's a pity.
Says hello.
Okay, well hello back to him. TF3HZ. He picked up my signals. And wow, that's neat. And so it's the contact with him that made me think, yeah, I'm going to talk about beacons when I do that, because I want something fresh. So we spoke to each other after he picked up my beacon signals and he said, yeah, I do this, yeah, it's good fun, blah, 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 blah. And I might try and come along. But unfortunately can't, but John said hi, so send my regards back to him. How do you say his name again?
Halto.
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 Halto. Halto. Okay. Yeah, okay. I just spend an awful lot of time transmitting beacon signals, right? I don't do very much reception. But like this talk, if there was nobody else in this room and I was standing up here transmitting, it would be a complete waste of time. If you weren't here. The only thing that makes this worthwhile is you sitting there. The transmitter, me, at the moment, depends on you, the receivers, to make the point of this evening, right? Otherwise it's a waste of time. And so it's really the people doing the receiving stations, like TF3HZ, whose name I'm still learning to say. Those are the real heroes in the beacon world, because without them, it's futile, there's no point. And there's some problems with the receiving stations, though. There isn't a uniform distribution of receivers all over the world. It'd be nice if there were, because then beacons could genuinely be a nice way of studying propagation. Because you could see how signals were spreading out from where you were to everywhere. But unfortunately you can't do that. You can only see how they're spreading out to where the receiving stations are. And that's different. That's solving a different problem. And secondly, what's interesting is that not all receiving stations are equal. And I'll show you what I mean in a moment. You might think that what you've got is that, a decent computer connected to the cloud and a decent rig with a decent antenna, and they're connected together by the sound card, which is all you really need, but you haven't got that at all. What you actually got is usually some old rig that they're just using for this purpose. They're not assigning their main rig to this task because it has to run continuously in order to serve a useful function. So there's often some old rig there, and instead of an antenna there's just something which is rather suboptimal. And so oftentimes the receiving stations are something which has just been put together and which stands over there running all the time in suboptimal conditions, which is better than nothing, but it's not exactly everything that could be achieved. And in terms of this distribution, if you look at the receiving map that I showed you earlier, I don't get any spots in the middle of the Atlantic. Okay? I get them, of course, from Iceland. That's because there are hams in Iceland. You're demonstrating that fact. So I get them from up here, but I don't get any from down here. And similarly, I don't get any from up there. Okay? Now, there's two reasons for that. Firstly, it's because there aren't very many hams in those locations, but mainly it's because I use wire antennas which happen to be positioned north-south, so I get lots of propagation east-west. So it's to do with directionality of my antennas, and it's to do with location of hams. So unless you have an omnidirectional antenna and a uniform distribution of receiving stations, these techniques are not really about studying propagation. They're sort of for fun. And that's what I get from it. But you can actually build receivers as well. And I've done some building of receivers, like this one, which is the printed circuit board layout for a little beacon receiver that I made to run on 40 meters. There's some of it realised, and there's the fact of it doing some reception just to prove that it works. Ooh, I went too quickly. I've already told you, part of the reason I was in Darlington this year had to do with writing about the fact that I was there last year as well. And we've got, I think, 5 copies of this book at a very special price. 1,000 Icelandic krona. Very special price. You can get them on Amazon if you want to buy them from Amazon, but they will, 1, cost more than that, and 2, you'll have to pay shipping.
And it won't be signed.
And it won't be signed. My wife said it, and it won't be signed. I don't know why she thinks you want her to sign them, but she'll sign them for you if you want. But these, we've got a few copies after selling them in Dayton. Forward was written, as it already says at the bottom, and somebody's already spotted, by George Dobbs, who's a famous celebrity in the QRP world. He's also my great friend. And it's a fantastically boring book. If anybody has a table with 3 legs and one other leg which is about that much short of the length of all of the other table legs, is perfect for your application. Okay, 1,000 kroner. That's it. Thank you very much.